was a girl, my older sister May was the golden one. Oh, indeed. Even her hair was curly, quite golden. I often wonder what would have become of me had she remained the golden one, but all of that changed when May was 21 and I was just 15 years old. As she approached the age of 20, May became quite independent, which Papa found disconcerting. Papa actually blew a sprocket on May's 21st birthday when she announced her intention to go to a dance with a young man named Clyde Berryman. In Papa's eyes, this Berryman was nothing more than a sheet music salesman, a gold digger, someone completely unfit to marry a Bonfils. And then it happened. May did something that would change the dynamics of our family forever. May eloped. She ran off to Golden, Colorado, and married that sheet music salesman behind Papa's back. And with that move, perhaps made in the name of love, May was no longer the golden one, the proverbial heir apparent, as it were. I moved into that position, but May's behavior of that time proved to be a haunting admonition that followed me forever. Sadly, Papa died on February 2nd, 1933. Truly Papa's girl at the age of 43, I had not yet married. Indeed, I had barely dated by that time. I am quite certain that the society matrons of the day had written me off as a sad old maid. 43. Our home in Denver was a splendid place. 50 rooms and now but 2 residents, plus a gaggle of servants. When Papa was in place, our home had seemed filled to the brim. He had that way about him. But with Father gone, as I said earlier, I felt that I often lived in his shadow, and with that shadow maker gone, I knew not what to do. Of course, what I was expected to do was to marry, and the better part of discretion at my ripe old age really required that I tarry no longer in this regard. Yet, with Father gone, I dreaded the idea of permitting another man to enter my life in any intimate fashion. I was certain that I would continually compare the poor sap to Papa and wonder if Papa would approve. In my mind, Papa and the Denver Post were virtually one and the same thing. The Post actually was one of the largest newspapers in the nation when Papa passed. The offices of the Post were a magical place for me. I just loved the hustle and the bustle and the vibrancy of it all. Suddenly then, I knew what I must do with Papa gone. I went to the Post and I took Papa's office where he had ruled the roost for almost 3 decades. Catherine Graham. Everyone talks about Catherine Graham and how she was the first woman publisher of a major daily newspaper in the United States. Well, yes, she did take the helm of the Washington Post when her husband took his life. The only thing we have in common was that we both moved into positions at newspapers when a man died. But the thing is, I became publisher of one of the largest dailies in this nation, larger than the Washington Post at the time, almost 30 years before Philip Graham broke down nervously and shot himself. Mrs. Graham, her newspaper, very involved in that whole Watergate affair with President Nixon. I do believe she was too involved. Had she been more discreet, I doubt that the Attorney General of the United States would have proclaimed Katie Graham's gonna get her tit caught in a big old ringer if that gets published. Well, no one ever made mention of my breasts, let alone the Attorney General of the United States recommending their placement in an appliance. When I took Papa's office at the Post, I elected a different title than his for my role. I made myself secretary of the company, a more appropriate title for a woman who wandered into the workplace in the midst of the Depression. I controlled the whole affair of the newspaper. I was the first woman to truly control a large daily newspaper in this nation, but Catherine Graham will always be listed in that capacity, I dare say. I exercised the discretion I learned earlier in life when I took Papa's office at the Post. But whether secretary or president or chairman of the board, a role I did take later in life, and actually I became president of the company in 1966, but no matter what the title, I always selected a man to front me in the affairs of the newspaper, a man who took his place in the front office, but who did my bidding. The longest serving of these fellows was Donald Sewell. He was around forever. I came to believe in time that the primary roles that men played in my life was most akin to that of well-placed puppets. Yes, puppets. Indeed, there were several men turned puppets over the course of my lifetime. But don't imagine that Papa was one such man. Oh, no, it's certainly all true that fathers can be turned into puppets by their daughters, but May was certainly not successful at turning Papa into a puppet, and I had no intention of doing so. When May eloped with that sheet music salesman, the shine was all gone in Papa's eyes, just all gone. And what relationship I did have with my sister May all but evaporated when when Mother left us. And that was but a couple of years after Papa passed. That day that Mother left us, I cannot even yet scribble that vision out of my mind. I still see Mother all crumpled up. We had a lovely circular staircase in our home. Mother was coming down that lovely staircase one morning, as she and I did every morning. But Mother had a horrible coronary attack, and she tumbled over and over, and she landed at the foot of the stairs, and Mother was dead. I honored Mother in 1943 by establishing the Helen Bonfils Memorial Blood Bank, which has continued to serve the public for 75 years. In her last will and testament, Mother awarded to me all of her shares of the Denver Post, thus giving me complete controlling interest in the newspaper at the expense of my sister May. But I had not run off. I did not elope with a sheet music salesman, no. I stayed loyal to Papa. I was Papa's girl. My interest in the opposite sex became more intense when my sister May started dating. Perhaps that was because of the intense competitive nature that existed between the two of us, but perhaps it was something else altogether. I remember sitting with May when she would come back from her dates in the park. I would ask May what went on between them. She would give me the most sterile explanation, saying that they had just talked and spooned. I was interested in knowing where the boy put his hands. I demanded to know where the boy put his hands. Where did that sheet music salesman put his hands? Well, May would just laugh and leave the room when I asked about this, she would just laugh and leave the room. Well, now, the marrying of homosexuals by women in show business, whether film or theater, became something of a recurring theme during the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Well, you know, Judy Garland had her homosexual, as did her daughter, and an assorted number of others, I dare say. And in time, I married my own homosexual, George Soames, who provided me with something of an entree to Broadway. Well, no, he opened the stage door for me, plain and simple. He served the purpose. Oh, initially, I guess I pretended that Soames and I would couple in a normal fashion, but the pink was still very prominent and would have shown through. Oh, I could have whitewashed the whole affair, but as I say, that pink would have still shown through, and frankly, rather brilliantly so. I can only imagine what Papa would have thought had he known that I married a homosexual. But, on the other hand, Soames was not a sheet music salesman. No, he was a success in the theater business. Hey, success. I first connected with Soames in 1936, the year after Mother tumbled down the stairs dead. I auditioned for the man when he became director of the Elitch's Theater, using the name Helen Barton, not wanting to stain the Bonfils moniker should I fail in my attempt to become an actress. You know, I was in a play that summer with Grace Kelly. Oh my goodness, didn't she marry well? But anyway, using a stage name rather than my family name mattered not. When told of my real name, it meant nothing to Soames, and I had been at the helm of the Post, the Denver Post, for several years at that point. Oh, can't remember where to go, but I invited him to our first date when I was nearly 50 and Soames was older still. In retrospect, I imagine that Soames and I were actually auditioning each other during that time for future business. Despite his homosexuality, Soames and I reached a détente. I provided him with much desired financial security, and he provided me with that entree to Broadway. Yes, you see, ours was a most practical and discreet arrangement. We did our best after this summer season to bring our show to Broadway. So right after the close of the Elitch theater season, we moved ourselves all the way to Broadway, and we rented the little theater, more recently known as the Helen Hayes. My first foray as a Broadway producer was a show called Sun-Kissed, which was fairly well panned in Manhattan as fluff. My next several shows did not actually fare much better, but by 1940 I enjoyed a string of successful plays that won praise from the critics and even made some money. They were Helen Goes to Troy, Make Mine Manhattan, oh, and Light Up the Sky. Yes. Not long before Soames started his descent, he hired a new chauffeur for me, a young man named Mike Davis, whom I soon learned preferred to be called Tiger Mike. With his 7th grade education, oh, that man could barely read by the time he started driving me. But he cut a fine appearance, and he could operate a motor car. I thought back to the first time that I met Tiger Mike, the first time he drove me in Manhattan. Yes, oh, and then I thought back to my sister May. I do wish she had told me more about where that boy put his hands.
Pausing.
By the time Soames lay on his deathbed, I was in my late 50s. No, 60s. Yes, I was in my late 60s. I had come to believe that men needed to be dusted before they could be touched. Not that touching Soames in any intimate fashion was ever an option over the course of our 20-year partnership. As Soames' condition worsened, I found myself seeking the respite of a motor car trip around Manhattan. Especially a trip to Central Park. You know, the green expanse there let me forget all about Soames. And then there was Tiger Mike, yes. These motor car trips, you see, they gave me an excuse for spending time with the boy. Yes, that is correct. I was 69 and the boy was 28. Oh, I constantly did the math in my head. I even doodled the math all over notepads when in business meetings, as if the difference in our ages would somehow change. 41 years. Well, I started reading 41 pages of the Bible daily. Perhaps the good Lord would intervene and make Tiger Mike older, or better yet, nip some years off of my age. Even half the difference would have been a tremendous improvement. I even toyed with the idea of building another church. Oh, but that was just really a fleeting thought one afternoon when Tiger Mike and I were parked in the park. But in the end, reading 41 pages of the Bible daily became my penance. As Soames lay dying in our New York apartment, I suddenly found myself living the very cliché of silly Broadway entertainment. Dandy husband near death, as the lady of the house works to bed the help. Well, I had already started the practice of motoring to Central Park with Tiger Mike at the wheel. I only needed to figure the manner in which an old broad goes about seducing a much younger fellow. I stewed for weeks, trying to develop a scheme of seduction, and then it dawned on me what had been there all along. Men are puppets. Tiger Mike could be just another man puppet in my life. I could cut a deal with Tiger Mike, who wanted nothing more than to become an oil man of all things. Oh, he would talk incessantly when we were parked at the park about his desire, his need, really, to become an oil man. And so I would make Tiger Mike an oil man, and he would, how do they say? Oh, yes, he would make me feel like a woman. And I did, and he did. Oh, it even occurred in the back seat of a motor car. I decided that I wanted to wed Tiger Mike, but of course, Soames needed to die. The priest seemed quite alarmed when I went to confession for the first time after having relations with Tiger Mike. Despite the supposed privacy of the confessional, all anonymity of all the pretense of that anonymity of the confessional just blew through the pews when Father gasped, "Oh, Miss Helen!" Well, I explained to Father in no uncertain terms that I intended to marry Tiger Mike when the time was right. But, of course, I could not marry a chauffeur. On this, Tiger Mike and I actually agreed. And so, by the time of our ceremony before the Justice of the Peace, my experience as a Broadway producer made this happen. Tiger Mike, motorcar driver, suddenly morphed into Mike Davis, oil man. Oh, I suppose it cost me something like $10 million to turn a chauffeur into an oil man. Yes, and not everyone was on board with this coupling. More than a few of my friends concluded that I was drunk when I coupled with Tiger Mike. Eventually, as a wildcatter, Tiger Mike made something like $150 million in the oil business. But for me, the payoff was in gaining a real husband who touched me, at least for a while. I'm pausing, Mike. Do you remember the McGuire sisters? Sincerely, don't you know that I love you? I'd do anything for you. Oh, yes, I enjoyed some of their songs for a while. You see, the McGuire sisters, well, one of the McGuire sisters, Phyllis, the younger one, became part of my life too. You see, Phyllis had become involved with Sam Giancana, a mafia boss. It's possible that Sam Giancana was involved in the killing of President John Kennedy. Oh, and I was so very fond of John Kennedy because of his Catholicism. Oh, and I adored his wife, Jacqueline. But this Giancana was not a man to be fussed with. I suppose it's possible that Giancana had nothing to do with the killing of President Kennedy, but he certainly was behind the efficient elimination of more than a few fellas. My young husband didn't seem to understand that one should not fuss around with a mafia boss, nor engage in an extramarital affair with his girlfriend. There was certainly nothing practical about Tiger Mike's association with this young McGuire girl, and certainly nothing discreet about the whole affair, unless that Giancana was an illiterate like my husband had been when he first started driving me. That Giancana had to know what was transpiring between his girl and my husband. I actually gave up riding in motor cars when I became aware of the affair. I was quite certain that a minion of Giancana's would plant an explosive device to be operated as soon as I got into that car, so I avoided that at all costs. I did hear that Giancana was forced to flee the country and move to Mexico to avoid being prosecuted, and that's probably the only reason that Mike Davis was not blown to smithereens. Oh, in time I came to believe that it might have been a relief if a mafia boss had agreed to blow Tiger Mike up. But you know, Phyllis McGuire had this marvelous home, and pieces ran in the media all over the place, and even in the Denver Post there was mention of it several times. You see, she had this mansion in Las Vegas. It was surrounded by a moat, and even had a replica of the Eiffel Tower popping out of the roof. Well, of course, everyone assumed that it was mafia money that built this palace for Miss McGuire. Well, that assumption was wrong. What people really never knew was that it was Tiger Mike that provided the financing necessary for Phyllis McGuire to live like a princess in Las Vegas. Yes, I did become enamored of the thought that an explosion of some sort would have been an improvement over my having to deal with Tiger Mike's shenanigans. But, you know, he had actually served a practical purpose. He had allowed me to experience physical intimacy. But those shenanigans did begin to take something of a toll. When my time on Earth finally ended, I wanted to be sure that I died on Denver Post time, so that the rival newspaper, the Rocky Mountain News, would not be able to carry the news of my death first. You see, News was a morning publication with a midnight deadline, and the Post came out in the afternoon. So I died at 2:20 in the morning. Tiger Mike got my family home and everything in it as part of the divorce settlement. Oh, he stripped the place and sent everything of value to Phyllis McGuire in Las Vegas. Everything. So, this time now, I must find my own way without Papa, without any man puppet. This time I am alone. My life, I didn't do much. I always felt that I just lived in Papa's shadow. That's what I think my life was all about. But these shadows here now, these shadows are not Papa's shadows, no. They are mine, all mine. Perhaps I am here until I make my own shadows go away.